Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to continue after the coffee break. The first speaker after the break is Jeff Huntington. He's head of Air and Climate Change Program at the European Environment Agency. He's half British, half Danish, I would say. Engineer from Cambridge and environmental planner from Roskilde University, Denmark. He has had key positions in Danish Environmental Agency, Scandinavian Airlines, Danish Permanent Representation to the EU, and he has been member of the cabinet in European Commission. Jeff will highlight energy efficiency from the perspective of the EU and Europe. So please, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Working okay? Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank the CITRA very much for inviting me or the European Environment Agency to come here today. It's a great pleasure, and it's certainly a very important issue. Flying in yesterday, I had two interesting experiences, both of which somehow reflect on the topic here. The first one was seeing snow when arriving in Helsinki airport last night. Living in Copenhagen nowadays, snow has become quite an exotic phenomenon. And so it was interesting to see the snow on the ground when I arrived. The other one was being driven in from the airport to the hotel in a Prius, a Toyota Prius. Again, another reflection of the sort of things which are going on at the moment. One, climate change, and the other one, a way of trying to mitigate climate change. So that was an interesting arrival. I'm not going to talk. I'm not an architect or city planner. You know a lot more about these issues than I do, I think most of you, but I'm going to be talking about some of the boundary conditions there are really for activities in this area and some of the challenges we're facing. So we'll take it from here. Very high level, we're seeing at the moment the world is facing multiple crises. There's a economic crisis, started as a financial crisis, but has now become a broader economic crisis, I think, hitting many sectors in many countries or most countries across the world. There's also a climate change energy crisis. Energy, we're talking about peak oil for energy. We're talking about climate change and what's going on there. And then also, we would like to highlight, from our point of view, the European Environment Agency, there's also a crisis around ecosystems and biodiversity. It is in many ways linked to the climate change, but it can also be looked upon in many ways as an important independent factor. So these all have common features. There's a lot of capital destruction, overconsumption you can talk about, and then risks and debts in the broader sense of the word being passed on to either the weakest, globally speak, or to future generations. There's also some differences. I think when I was at Roskilde University, we were all Marxists then, and we always talked about economic crises being cyclical, which is also part of a classical economic theory. So finance and economy will probably recover in some way or other, but the other two are not cyclical. And what we would really see is a need or hope that the world will find integrated approaches which, while tackling the financial economic crisis, the cyclical nature of that, we can actually build sustainable solutions on the other issues without going into the discussion of what sustainability is, as was discussed earlier in the panel. So we'd like to hope that integrated approaches can be developed that really address all three issues at the same time, so that actually this financial economic crisis becomes a window of opportunity to move the world's governance, economic systems, economic governance in a more sustainable direction when we're talking about the other two challenges. And this is been captured not just by us, by thinkers across the world, and one of the terms being used is the global Green New Deal, or Green New Deal reflecting back to the New Deal paradigm in the 30s in the United States, where you could say that there was an agreement between the president and the American citizens that we needed a new way of thinking, new way of working. That was the New Deal. We're now thinking at a global level, we need a Green New Deal. So New Deal thinking, but with a very green profile. Just briefly, I thought I'd just check a little bit, where do we stand with Finland? Though I'm mainly talking about Europe. Finnish emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, have grown by 13.2% since 1990 to 2006. 2007 figures will be coming out soon. So, whereas the EU average has fallen by 7.7%. So Finland still has some way to go to meet its Kyoto commitment, which in the EU burden sharing agreement has been translated to 0%. So Finland, as an average over the period 2008 to 2012, has to get down to 0 from the 13.2 it was in 2006. And obviously further domestic measures and or using the Kyoto flexible mechanisms supporting projects outside of Europe will be necessary in order to achieve the target. And then, of course, that's only the Kyoto targets, which are the period 2008 to 2012. After that, we get into the what's being discussed at the moment for 2020 at the global level, and will be hopefully decided in Copenhagen in December. But Europe has already said that it will, the EU has already said it will reduce by 20% in 2020 overall as a unilateral commitment from Europe, which translated for Finland means that it has to increase its share of renewables from 28.5% to 38% and also improve energy efficiency. And Europe has also said that, assuming that there's a comparable efforts made by other developed countries, then Europe should go to 30% overall reductions, which obviously will translate into more challenging targets for Finland. And just where Finland is just highlighting the industry and construction sectors in Finland, decoupling of CO2 emissions from energy consumption and the GDP has been succeeded, but energy consumption is growing overall, and this is obviously something which Finland, I think, will have to look at. Buildings are a key sector, and while a lot of the focus today is on new projects, and that's also important, we have to remember that the existing mass of buildings in Europe is a huge legacy, if you like, where there's a large potential to reduce energy consumption. Buildings represent 40% of final energy consumption, and there are major reduction potentials even with existing knowledge and technologies. And I won't go into more details there, but the final point is important, which also goes back to the discussion about the new deals. A lot of jobs can be created here, and that this can be also a strong link to the discussion about how the way out of the financial and economic crisis. So what's Europe doing? I think probably many of you are following this closely than I am personally. But it's revising the Buildings Directive, as it's called, so that major improvement is to reduce increase the scope of the directive to also include smaller buildings, then ensure better coherence with legislation regulating building products used in buildings, increasing the use of renewables, distributed generation, etc., going for lower CO2 emissions and primary consumption, certification, getting public authorities to be early movers, early adopters, and then stronger focus on implementation. That's the Commission proposal. In the Parliament, they've strengthened it in different ways. One is very important, the first one, to define a common methodology on how to measure, as benchmarking of buildings with low CO2 emissions and energy consumption. And then strengthening the role of authorities, getting money to support renewable energy projects and energy efficient projects, using the EU structural funds, and then also addressing the issue of energy poverty. Adoption is expected by the end of 2009, but as you can see here, there will be major deadlines after that where the methodology comes into force. Funds are made available together with the European Investment Bank to support renewable energy projects, etc. So though the directive will be adopted later this year, hopefully, there's important milestones after that. Just to look a little bit at buildings, the life cycle impacts of residential buildings, this just gives I won't go into all the details, but just shows that it's really the single-family dwellings that have the highest relative energy, greenhouse gas emissions. So just helps to focus the mind a little bit, though, of course, other buildings also have their impacts. But it's when people start moving into single dwellings that in itself means an increase in the environmental load. And another thing is very important is price matters. The price of energy matters very clearly. This is a very complicated graph. I'm not going to explain it all in detail, but it just gives you for three cities across Europe, including Helsinki, it just gives you an idea of what energy prices mean for optimal building standards from an economic point of view, where the break-even is. So we've got roof, walls, and floor, and for each town, and then we've got 3 sets of bars. The top bar is sort of existing building codes. The middle set of 3 bars is if with a high peak, as it's called here, energy price of about $110 per barrel, and the bottom set of 3 is around $60 per barrel. So obviously this comes into the equation. It's also, of course, it's interesting to see how climate matters as well. So Northern Europe is not the same as Southern Europe, and obviously these methodologies to define low CO2 buildings will have to take that into account. So energy consumption in households, 2005, Finland's there, but unfortunately we didn't have all the data for Finland there. But most of energy is consumed for space heating, but electricity consumption is growing faster. It's an important message there. I won't go into any more detail there. Energy efficiency index. So efficiency has been improving, and it's improved by 15% since 1990. And CO2 emissions per dwelling have also been decreasing by 24% since 1990. So there are positive messages there. But we're still not getting the full benefit of them. And I think this is one of the most important pictures here, is to see that if you take the left-hand side with EU 27, then efficiency gains have been annual. The annual percentage change over the period from 1990 to 2006 has been over 1%. But this has been counteracted by 3 other very important factors. So more appliances, larger homes, and behavior. And so that the net improvement has only been around 0.2% per year. Same picture in Europe, though behavior has tipped over to the other side. So this, and also picks up one of the points made in the panel discussion, is that it's while looking at the building itself, the building envelope is important, you've also got to take many other factors in, including human behavior and the way people use their buildings. And this will be, I think, one of the major challenges in the future, as well as, of course, looking at the efficiency of appliances, as well as the efficiency of buildings. We've got to address the whole issue. And then, just to bring in one study from case study from Sweden, which we've been looking at, which was very interesting. They were looking at existing buildings and analysing the potential for energy consumption reduction, energy efficiency improvements, and came up with some very strong results that that district heating, heat pumps should always be considered as a first option. Biomass goes, so moving to a renewable source is important, but there is a loss in efficiency, in generation efficiency with biomass, so that really moving to cogeneration, combined heat and power, is essential as a package of that. But when doing these things, we can actually reduce primary energy by 88% and CO2 emissions by 96%. So this, for me as well, for us, brings out another strong message, and that is that, and this was also interesting listening to this discussion in the panel, is that buildings have to be thought into cities, but really have to be thought into energy systems. So that we have to sort of start thinking perhaps around an energy system and then build a city to exploit it, rather than the way we often operate today. Mainly, really, we start building cities and then think about the energy as afterwards, perhaps. I'm not saying everybody does it, but perhaps more focused from the very beginning of bringing the energy situation, the energy supply, into the equation. So just to round off, I would say my conclusions are that, firstly, say the present economic crisis can also be seen as an opportunity to guide society into a more sustainable path. So they're also tackling concerns about climate change and energy and biodiversity and ecosystems. Creating an energy efficient building sector, very much looking at retrofitting the existing building mass as well as looking at new construction, is an important part of this equation. It does a lot for the environment, and at the same time it can do a lot for sustainable jobs in Europe. So it's a win-win, both addressing the economic side and the environmental side. Buildings have to be seen as important elements in towns, and we have to think in an integrated fashion, bringing optimal energy solutions into towns and cities. And then also not just thinking about energy, but also thinking about transport, obviously, which is really the area which is out of control at the moment with growing transport and growing greenhouse gas emissions. We need to get the price signals right, which is a huge challenge because the volatility of the price signals over the last year has really been a huge, at one point it was a huge benefit to the environmental debate and the debate around energy efficiency in buildings and transport. But now it's fallen away again, the energy prices, the price of oil dramatically dropped, and suddenly lots of questions, influential people are beginning to question the whole thing again. So getting the price signals right and internalizing external costs, for example, is important, but how to do it in practice, I think, is a major challenge. We also need to support the right investments, as is also being proposed by the European Parliament. So we need to make sure that our when we are actively, governments are actually using money that are going to the right purposes. And then, of course, we also need to be looking at getting the right framework in the way of the right building codes, as is also represented by the directive coming through the institutions in Brussels. Price signals are also important. I think we're not talking about the buildings themselves, but also talking about behavior of the people living in the buildings, which I was talking about before. So if we can find a mechanism to do that, then there's a long way to go. That was 0, right? I've got 1 left. And then finally, I just want to say, of course, in the way of behavior and everything, the standards for the appliances in the buildings is also very important, as well as the buildings themselves. That was all. Thank you very much for your attention, and all the best for the competition. I hope it really delivers some exciting results. Thank you.
Just a second. Thank you, Jeff, for highlighting the overall situation in Europe. Now we have time for 1 or 2 questions, if you have in mind. Here.
Thank you. I'm Karin Taipale from the Marrakesh Task Force for Sustainable Buildings and Construction. I was wondering about your comment about price signals, because that's something that has been discussed for a long time. It doesn't seem to work in buildings because there's so many. The price of energy gets split into so many little parts, so it doesn't really work as a carrot.
I think I also said that it's finding a way of getting it to work, and of course with buildings, also because of their long-term character, it's not that easy. But I think if we could get, if you like, the right long-term stable price signals that energy is expensive, then I think it can also influence the building sector, even with the issues you're talking about, splitting it up into different values. I'm not saying it's a universal cure, but I think it's a part of the equation, is to try and improve the way the signal being sent from prices.
Thanks. Any other questions? So we thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
And continue